Hey everyone, before we introduce our next guest, we want to invite you to join us for a really special event. On National Women's Day, March 8th, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., we will be hosting our Divine Feminine and Women Empowerment event at the Compass Gallery in Provo, Utah. This event is for both men and women who are interested in exploring the power and beauty of the Divine Feminine. It will be an evening of art, conversation, and inspiration, with incredible speakers, beautiful art, delicious food, and a chance to connect with people from all backgrounds. Get your tickets now at tinyurl.com/empower2025. We can't wait to see you there. Now on to today's guest. Welcome back to That's Church. I'm Emily Call, here with my sister Ashley Sanders. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Kurt Francom to the podcast. Kurt is the founder and executive director of Leading Saints, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. The Leading Saints podcast is one of the premier Latter-day Saints podcasts, reaching 500,000 downloads each month and a lifetime reach of 20 million total downloads. Super impressive. Kurt is also the author of Is God Disappointed in Me? Removing Shame from a Gospel of Grace. He graduated from the University of Utah in 2008 with a degree in business marketing. He ran a web development company for 5 years before focusing on Leading Saints full-time in 2016. Kurt currently lives in American Fork, Utah with his lovely wife, Alana, and their 3 children and dog. We had such a fascinating conversation about grace, disappointment, and how we can better understand God's love for us. You can listen to Kurt's podcast, Leading Saints, anywhere that you get your podcasts, and if you haven't yet, make sure to grab a copy of his book, Is God Disappointed in Me, on Amazon, available in paperback and audio. Let's jump into the conversation. I loved your book, first of all.
Thanks.
I brought it.
Oh, good.
It's so good. I absolutely loved it. So I read half of it and then the audio came out. So I was like, ooh, I'm kind of busy right now in my life.
Yeah.
So I'll just listen to the other half. And I loved how, I loved listening to it. For one, you did a great job. And I always love listening to the author themselves. I think that's great.
Yeah.
But also it's pretty quick. Like it was a pretty quick, easy read. However, I feel like it's so packed full of wisdom. Like,
oh, good.
Just really amazing. And I loved it. So,
okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was great. I really related to so much of the book. And the pieces that I didn't really did make me think. And there were so many things that you said in it that I thought, oh my gosh, I have wanted to say so many of these things. I just didn't know how to articulate it. So it was so great that that's out there. Like that all of those things that I wish I could tell people or that I've had in the back of my mind and not been able to articulate is in a book and so well written. I messaged bishops that I know and I'm like, I feel like every bishop should read this. Every church leader I feel like should read this. It's so well said. And like I said, the pieces that I didn't totally relate to or am still kind of thinking about, it made me think, which I think is so important in a good book, something that really makes you think and ponder and question the things that you already believe, you know?
Yeah.
So, you did a great job. I really
thank
loved
you.
it.
Yeah, and that's part of it is I don't claim to write like the perfect book or everything is 100% true or accurate or doctrinal. And there may be parts of that where people do disagree. However, my goal is to not to win them over to my side or have them believe as I believe, but to get them to think. So even if people disagree with parts of the book, as long as it's making them think, like that's perfect.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That's a lot of what we want on our podcast as well. Like we just want people to open their minds and just not even necessarily understand something different, but just hear something different, you know, and be aware of things that are different and different perspectives and ideas. So I really appreciate that. So could you share with us the inspiration behind your book?
Yeah, sure. So, the book, so Is God Disappointed in Me? Removing Shame from a Gospel of Grace. You know, a lot of people know me from Leading Saints, which is a platform where we talk about leadership within the church, right? And so people might expect, oh, if Kurt Frankom's writing a book, it must be a leadership book. But and most people may not classify it as a leadership. However, just like you said, you reached out to many leaders and saying you need to read this book. So it really is at its core a leadership book, as not just for formal church leaders, but for anybody who identifies as a leader, whether as a parent or a church leader or just a member of society, right? And what I noticed is that as I talk to different people, hear different stories, understand maybe why people leave the church or leave faith altogether, certain themes came up, or not just themes, but certain misunderstandings that kept coming to the surface. And really they all fit under this umbrella of maybe what I'd call like a spiritual or religious overwhelm, right? Where they get to a place of like, I'm just done with all the things, all the tasks, all the responsibilities, all the expectations that my church or my religion or my spirituality is constantly prodding me with. And that makes me step back and pause a little bit thinking, oh, that's interesting. Like, you're overwhelmed by the church experience. I don't think it was ever meant to overwhelm us as much as meant to redeem us. I mean, that's at the core of this beautiful message of a Savior who came to this earth, lived in mortality, suffered what we suffered, died for us, so that we could have an easier time, to say the least, in mortality. His yoke is heavy, his burden is light, and he'll join us in that journey when it gets heavy. And so it should be redemptive. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Where are people like misunderstanding concepts of the gospel that lead them to this place of overwhelm? And one message I kept coming up with is overwhelm. Sort of at the core of overwhelm is this feeling of disappointment, of that, like, yeah, we get it. We're not perfect. We get it. And Jesus was the only perfect one to live on the earth. But still, I could do better. I know I could do so much more every day, and I constantly don't. Or even the easy things that on paper they seem like I should be, just rocking life in this realm, but I keep falling short. And that's where the overwhelm comes. And that because of this feeling of, well, yeah, I know God loves me, but he must be disappointed in me because I just keep messing up, or I just don't live up to the expectations that he has for me, which are oftentimes simply the expectations we have for ourselves. That, I thought if I jumped through all the hoops, did all the things, kept up with the rat race of religion, then I would be blessed, or then life would just work out, and my children would go on missions, or my children would stay faithful in my church, or all the, my marriage would work out. And then when it doesn't, that's where we step back and wonder, well, God must be disappointed in me.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think that people do assume that God is disappointed in us because that's a human emotion. That's a human way of reacting to things. When I was telling a friend about your book, actually, before I read it, he was like, okay, but I get that maybe God isn't disappointed in like minor things, but he's got to be disappointed in like murderers and
right.
like all of those, like serial killers and like all these things. And I'm like, well, I don't know yet. Read the book and we'll see. And when I present the book to people, I always tell them what it's called. I'm like, it's called "Is God Disappointed in Me?" And he's not.
You're like, spoiler
and guess
alert.
what? Spoiler alert. He's not.
That's right.
So anyway, but so I loved that actually you answered that question really early on in the book, like within a couple of chapters, when you talk about expectation versus expectancy. And you particularly use a BYU game analogy, which I thought was really cool. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, sure. So, that this is, like your friend said, like, it's sometimes hard to believe, like, oh, come on, Kurt, like, really, like, the murders, the pedophiles, the terrorists, the bombings, the tragedy that is instigated in this world by people, by his children, he's not disappointed in them.
Right.
And, yeah, that can be a big pill to swallow for sure. And so I kind of just want to step back and through those first chapters, like, all right, let's just do the math of the things we do know about God, his character, his nature, and see if they fit in that narrative of disappointment. And so, there is a perspective that is, I think, generally believe that God is all-knowing. So he knows from the beginning, from the end, and disappointment comes from having an expectation that does not become fulfilled. And so God can't have an expectation if he knows exactly what's happening. Like he can see the future, right? Now, there's some theological debate on whether God is really all-knowing. Like, does he really know that I'm going to have a pastrami sandwich for dinner tonight? Like, I don't know. Like, right? Is he really all-knowing? And so even, let's say he's not. But if he showed up to church and he gave a witness, a testimony about his son, Jesus Christ, and the sacrifice that he gave, would he say, yeah, I sent my son to earth, and I really hope that he'll, this will work out, or I'm really crossing my fingers that, man, this plan that we put together long ago will really work for all of you? No, like there's going to be certainty there. And sort of the mortal experience that I had, to sort of put this in a place where my mortal brain could understand it, is when I was traveling to a conference that was off the grid. I'd had no internet access and no cable TV access, but I'm a huge BYU football fan, and I was unfortunately going to miss a pretty big game that I was intrigued to see how my team would perform. And so, of course, I was going to record it and watch it when I came home, but I also didn't want to play that game where you're like plugging your ears around people or avoiding social media because you don't want to know the score.
Yes.
And so I just looked at, when I got back on the grid, I looked at the score, and I was pleased to see that my BYU Cougars won in overtime over Tennessee. And I was excited to see how this game unfolded. So I went home, began to watch this game, and I was shocked to see, I think there was 18 seconds left in the fourth quarter of regulation. BYU was down, and they had the whole field to go in order to even have a chance to tie it up. But I knew that they won in the end. And so every time there was a fumble, a loss of yardage, an incomplete pass, I didn't worry because I knew how it would end. I had full expectancy in that moment that they would win. So I had no room for an expectation that, well, you better come through here, because I was all knowing in that context. And it made for a completely different experience, as someone observing what was happening. And so this is how God sees our life. The score is set. The game is over. Christ came, he suffered, he died, he won the battle. The score is set. And we're still wondering, well, maybe he's still disappointed in me because I didn't perform well in the fourth quarter. Like, what are you talking about? He knows that this works for you. And so that's the beauty of the God that we worship, is that he has no room for expectation. In fact, he can't experience it because he's all-knowing, or he has full faith, full knowledge that his son's sacrifice worked.
Wow. Oh man, that really hit me. I love it. It also leaves so much room for agency, because I think that's sometimes people's concern with an all-knowing God is like, well, if he knows I'm going to eat the pastrami sandwich, what's the point? You know what I mean? Like if everything's decided for me, but the way you explain that leaves room for agency and for choices. Yeah. So that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where, you go, again, we'll go to the extreme example, the murderers, the pedophiles, the abusers, the terrorists, whatever. Like, does the atonement not reach them? Well, I to be honest, I don't know how that works in the other side. And maybe, it talks about in Moses 7 that God wept over the residue of his people. And I love the term that he uses, the residue of his people, like such a small, minute portion of his people that literally rejected him. So, okay, maybe if the murderers, killers, dictators, tyrants fall within that, in the residue, maybe God is disappointed in them because they rejected him. But for the mom who's trying to just get her kids to church on Sunday, or the dad who's caught up in sexual addiction and destroys his family, for that person where the atonement is clearly still available, all he has to do is reach out and grab it, then why would God need disappointment there when he knows the plan works for them? And eternity's a long game. He's got it's not just this decade that he's got to figure it out. It's such a long game that if we do the scriptural or theological math, I just don't see how we can create a God who has expectation, a God who has disappointment, and that's the beauty of it. That's the redemptive power of grace.
And I was watching a TV show with my kids, and there was a nanny that was taking care of these kids. I don't even know what this show was. It was super weird, but
there's a lot of that on these days.
But there was a nanny that came in and was taking care of these kids, and their parents were awful, and so they didn't trust people. And the nanny had texted, "I will take care of the kids," and the kids heard it or read it as, "I will take care of those kids," And so they were like, "We've got to get away from her." Anyway, and then she finds them again and she's like, "No, this is how I wrote it. I will take care of the kids," And so
different tone.
Yeah. I had watched that right after reading this part in your book where you emphasized interpreting the scriptures with the character of God in mind and advocating for a loving tone. I thought, oh my gosh, that's so important. And I think we see that a lot in our day because of texts and because of emails. And
tone matters.
Tone really does matter, and interpretation really does matter. So how do you think this approach transforms our understanding of God?
Yeah. So this is the sort of where people go when they hear these concepts I talk about, is like, well, I mean, have you read the Old Testament, Kurt? It looks like it's filled with a disappointed God who's just angry and coming after people, right? And yeah, the reality is do I know for sure that God's never been disappointed? I don't know. Maybe I'll get to the other side and he'll say, this was a really cute book you wrote, Kurt, but I was, perpetually disappointed. And you're like, wow, I had no idea. But in the moment, in my mortal experience, it's not a redemptive place to be or a redemptive framing to have of the gospel. And so why would I want to stay there when it's more discouraging or overwhelming? And so when people often, point to the Old Testament God or various verses where it seems like, oh, right here, Kurt, like God is not well pleased with his people, therefore he must be disappointed. The reality is there are times when I frame God as the eternal coach, our eternal coach, where he has to get on with eye level with us and say, the course that you're on is destructive. You need to change. And yesterday I met with a friend for lunch who his dad owned a TV repair shop growing up, and so he'd often be involved in repairing TVs. Back when TVs needed a lot of maintenance and things like that. And they would deliver the TV at their home, and they would adjust the settings. And one of the settings they would adjust is sharpness, right? And the scripture of he who corrects, now I'm going to set myself up here, but he rebukes sharply, or whatever the term is. And really that means not angrily or with disappointment. It often means he communicates with clarity. That's why we adjust the sharpness on our TVs, because we want clarity, right? So God will be very clear with us at times, while at the same time have no disappointment in us. He wants to deliver a message to get us on the right track. And so, is God disappointed in the scriptures? Well, the reality is I can't understand the nature of God fully. Like if my 11-year-old daughter was put in front of an individual and had to describe perfectly my experience as a 41-year-old father, she could maybe do a good job. Like, oh, he seems like a happy guy, and he does this for work, and he likes to do this for fun and talk through these things. But she doesn't even begin to understand the intricacies of being adult in 2024, and the burdens, the temptations, the pressures that are on me as an adult male, or all these things, right? And we can't begin to pretend that we can talk about all the intricacies of why God responded this way or that way. However, when I zoom out and look at the core of the gospel, again, the doing the math, the theological math, I don't see how grace and disappointment can coexist. He can't give me something in a way of grace and saying, please, here's my sacrifice, here's my atonement, I gave you my son, now take him, be redeemed. And then when we do, he sort of rolls his eyes like, oh, really? I didn't actually think you needed a savior. Like, this is ridiculous, right? Like, disappointment and grace cannot coexist. It just like darkness and light can't consume the same space at the same time.
Gee. And I love the sharpness idea. That's so cool. That is so cool, because it does feel like, maybe God is sharp with us, but really it's just clarity. It's just making sure that there's clarity, because there can be lost, through interpretation or through clarity or through tone, things could be lost. So I like that. I feel like after reading your book and talking with you, I will definitely read the scriptures, especially the Old Testament, differently. And
Sure.
I'm excited to do that. Like, I'm excited to kind of change that tone in my mind. And I think I love the tone in the New Testament, the version that I create already, and the Book of Mormon. But I think that tone could be changed in the Old Testament for sure. That's really, I love that. I love those thoughts.
I feel like also, I think it's important to remember that, they were interpreting God in a totally different time, totally different era. And when we we visited Ireland, and they talked about fairies, and, I grew up hearing about fairies, and they're cute, and they take your tooth and leave you money, and they're
Yeah.
like the original folklore of fairies is that if you did something wrong, they would kidnap you in the night and
Goodness.
drag you into the ocean and like terrible things. But it reminded me of, and I can't remember where I heard this, but I've heard that, people used to use God and religion in a fearful way in order to help people do the right things, because there wasn't policemen, there wasn't jails really where we could facilitate people and criminals. So instead they would invoke this fear in people to do the right thing. And, even in, I think, some third world countries still, they'll put Jesus stickers on things so that they won't get stolen, because people fear that more than jail. They don't want, so, and I don't know, it just makes me think about that kind of thing too, that, they were interpreting God in a totally different time period. And so, I don't know, that just came to mind. I wanted to share that, but I
think
do
a
love
lot
the
of people,
sharpness. Yeah.
It's a lot of people, they don't want their disappointed God taken from them, because that disappointed God that they believe in really gets them out of bed on Sunday, gets them to church, and gets them doing the right thing, right? And a lot of people will come to me and say, "Wait a minute, Kurt. Like, I grew up in a home that was actually full of a lot of shame, right? Like, my parents used it on me, my teachers, my coaches, my church leaders used shame on me." And I'm like, yeah, because that's why shame works. It works. And that's why his parents were so tempted to default to shame at times. And again, I'm literally the guy that wrote the book on it, and I still resort to shame at times. And thankfully, there's repentance, and I can apologize and things like that. But people think like, well, no, you can't take this tool away from me because it's extremely effective. Yeah, it is extremely effective. But guess what's even more effective? Love, grace, acceptance, but it's more complicated. And it's more of a long game. And it's harder to just love my kids enough so that they get their shoes on and head out the door in less than 3 minutes, right? Or get ready for bed in less than a half hour. It's like, come on, let's get moving, right?
Well, I in your book too, I love, probably my favorite chapter was about love, because we definitely, Ashley and I, and probably our family in general, we definitely err on the side of love. But I really liked your explanation of, you have to have a balance though. Like, you can focus on love and grace, but there also has to be, and I can't remember the word you used, but obedience, or do you remember what's the word you used?
Like, there's love on one side and law on the other, or grace and commandments and things like that. Yeah, like these feel like opposite terms when in reality they're working together. Yeah. We definitely err on the love side, and I think it was eye-opening for me to be like, oh, okay, we do need both. Yeah.
Like, they are both important, but I think sometimes we have to proclaim like love and grace because things have been on the other side for so long, maybe since Old Testament times, like it has been more like letter of the law rather than spirit of the law for so long, that I feel like, I think this time in the information age, we're all kind of like, whoa, there's all this other information out there, and we're all kind of trying to figure out what we believe in and where we fit into the whole purpose of everything. And I think we're kind of realizing there's a little bit of an imbalance with letter of the law versus spirit of the law. And so,
Right.
But it was good for me to see, like, okay, let's not go over this side too far.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times as we communicate the gospel, we try and do so with sort of overstatements or hyperbolic statements. Like, I often hear the concept of, the gospel, the church, or the gospel is just about love. And sometimes we can get stuck in the love side of the gospel experience, like, oh yeah, we just love people. Like, but then people think, okay, I'm loving people. Like, why is God giving us all those commandments and covenants? Like, aren't we just supposed to love people? And it's almost overstated to the point of, like, it almost doesn't mean anything anymore. It's so cliche of, like, I just love people. Like, and people interpret that differently, right? So I often frame it that the gospel isn't all about love or just about love. The gospel begins with love. And as we engage in that love and receive that acceptance, that grace, God will then introduce us to commandments and covenants, not to measure our worth by or some obscure obstacle course in mortality that we have to get through under a certain amount of time. No, like, he wants us to become something. And so when I feel grace, when God comes to me and says, Kurt, I love you today, even if you never change, even if you do nothing different, I love you completely today. In that moment of grace, I can't help to turn to God and say, how do I become like you? What else can I do to be more like Jesus Christ? And he's like, oh, great. I'm so glad you asked. I have these commandments and covenants. Why don't you step into this workshop and together we'll work on these things. Now, the thing is sometimes people get stuck in love thinking, oh, the gospel is just about love. Other times people get stuck in commandments, like, okay, how many times, I missed church today, so God's going to be disappointed there. And let's see, I need to do A, B, and C. And, they get stuck in these behaviors of the gospel and they misinterpret while they're doing them and they begin to do them. And this is my story where I get trapped in these behaviors to the point that I feel like if I don't do them, I will be rejected by God. He'll be disappointed. He'll reject me. And nobody wants to be in that state of mind. That's not a redemptive state. But we swing back and forth, and some days I need an abundance of love. I just need acceptance, someone to sit with me, hear my sob story. And other days I want to dig into the scriptures, understand doctrinal intricacies, and really understand his commandments and covenants so that as I swing back, I can actually find deeper love. And as I find deeper love, I can find deeper commandments, deeper commitments to God as I become something more and more through his grace.
Well said. And the topic of correction versus disappointment is super intriguing as well. So can you help us distinguish between those two?
Yeah. I guess the general concept is that, just because we are given grace, right? There's nothing more we could do or less we can do to gain God's love. We're just always in his love. And then the worry is like, well, then why will people even care, right? The cheap grace concept of, I guess we can just do whatever we want then? Like, no. Like, there will be moments, like, at the end of the day, like, sin will destroy you. And sin isn't just like, here's the commandments, and if you break these commandments, that's sin. Like, sin is any time, in any circumstance where we turn away from God as the answer, or turn away from Jesus Christ as the answer. So even if it's like, I'm having a bad day, and so I just want to go eat a lot of food, or I'm having a bad day, I want to escape with Netflix. I'm having a bad day, and so I'm just going to do the death scroll, right? Because I can escape these feelings I'm feeling. I can numb them. I can cope with them. When in reality, anytime we go to any other answer but Jesus Christ and God, then that is a place of sin. That's where sin happens, and sin will destroy you. Okay. And so I never want to paint the perception of like, God's never disappointed in you, so eat, drink, and be merry, and, have fun. No. Like, God will come to us and correct us, even in this full state of grace of saying, I love you completely. Now hear me out. If you turn away from me, it doesn't end well. So please lean in, let me help you, right? Now, he may use tools and, especially when mental health is concerned or, professional help's needed. He'll use all those tools to help you find the answer. But at the core of every answer, at the core of the answer of every bad day is Jesus Christ. And so anytime we turn from that, he will correct us. But here's the point, is that from a parenting standpoint, we often feel like, no, it's just my role to correct. And many people out there have maybe had that tyrannical parent who's just always on their case, like always pointing out where they're falling short. Like, that won't work unless it's built on a basis of full acceptance, full love, full grace. And so that's where God starts. That's where the gospel begins, with love. And correction will come, but it's coming out of love. And when we feel that grace, anything God tells me, I'm going to listen, even when it doesn't make sense. And you could look at the things I do, especially, as a Latter-day Saint, I don't drink coffee. And people ask me, why don't you drink? Tell me the logic behind not drinking coffee. I don't know. I really don't know, other than I feel like God has asked me to do that. And any ridiculous thing God asked me to do, I'm going to do it, because it's this refining process that he's helping me become something more, even in the ridiculous commandments.
I'm glad that you mentioned mental health also, because I think it's important to distinguish that difference. I think that sometimes I have seen people get go kind of in an extreme, and they'll just rely on Jesus Christ and God. And there are physical things that we need to take care of, here, physical, mental, emotional things. And I think like therapy and, medication sometimes is needed and things like that. So I think I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think that's so important to distinguish that, because people can definitely go a little bit extreme and not realize that those things are still needed, and we're still human beings.
And that's where people get stuck on maybe on the behavior or commandment side of the spectrum, where they think, well, the reason I'm feeling depressed, I just need to read my scriptures 10 times a day. Maybe if I do it 10 times, maybe even 12 times, that'll even be better, right? Or I need to, become more rigid in my religious practices, and that'll fix it. Again, you're turning from God in a sense, because you're focusing on the behavior, not on God, where God will say, I think you need to talk with somebody. In fact, somebody with experience, right? Or maybe they'll recommend some medications which will help, regulate some physical, mental dynamics that are happening, right? So all these things that God has created, he'll invite us into to find the answer, which is him.
Yes.
So true.
And I think that just becomes, it helps us to realize it's all well-rounded. We have a spirit, we also have a body, and we also have a mind, so we have to take care of our spiritual needs as well as our physical and emotional needs.
I'm kind of trailing back. I was going to say, on the subject of disappointment, right when we came into this, you said something about being disappointed, Emily, or how we're disappointed in ourselves. And I was thinking about that, and how I think that as a parent now, I view my parents and my childhood differently, and I realize how grateful, you kind of realize, like, man, I had it so good, because I am so grateful that I had parents, and I believe that our heavenly parents are the same way. I had parents who loved me so much that it made me, I never wanted to do the wrong thing. Like, I wanted to do the right things, not because I was worried about them being disappointed in me or mad at me, or there wasn't fear. It wasn't fear-based. It was love-based. And it's because I respected them so much that I wanted them to be proud of me. And I feel that from our heavenly parents too, that when we mess up, they're not like, how could you? They're just like, oh, they're learning. Because I'm that same way with my kids now. If my son makes a mistake, I'm not like, I don't like you anymore.
You should move out.
I just love them. And I think that is, I think being a parent, it helps us look at it in a different way, at least for myself, where it's easier for me now to see that my heavenly parents love me unconditionally and want the best for me unconditionally, because I want that for my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And, speaking in that context of parenting, a lot, I was sharing this message at various firesides and things at churches, and this one instance, this mother came up to me after and said, well, what about me? Like, I'm disappointed in my kids all the time, right? That sometimes there's this message where I want to diminish shame, sometimes creates shame in people, where it's like, well, what about me? I'm disappointed all the time. And for one, you have to realize that's a very mortal experience, and that's okay. Like, I get jealous, or I get frustrated or angry or mad or all these mortal experiences that it's not because I'm a bad person, it's because I'm a person, right? Like, and so just to recognize that, yeah, we'll get disappointed as well. And a lot of parents or individuals don't know what to do with that. And I often point them to just like the more that we can receive grace from Jesus Christ, the more it enables us to give grace to others. I've just noticed the more I've felt from God that he's never been disappointed in me. He's overly encouraging, that he just wants more and more for me, the more I think, oh, wow, I can give that to others, right? And so nobody should ever feel ashamed if they feel disappointment, because you're not all knowing. You can't see. I can't. I can't watch a BYU football game live and know how it ends. So I'm going to be disappointed in those moments. But that just makes you human, right? And God has so much more to teach us as we learn to remove expectations and just love people where they're at and invite them into a relationship that will be refining for both you and them.
Yeah, we are not gods, and God cannot be disappointed, but we can't.
Yeah, right.
There will be times that we are.
Yeah.
So
that's where hope and grace and forgiveness all come in.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm glad the parenting, I really enjoyed the parenting section in your book as well. And we're not going to get into that right now, but we very much parent in the style that you explained, and I loved it. It was so good. And it explained the type of parenting that I believe in so well.
Okay.
And so I would just encourage our listeners to definitely read the book and read that part on parenting, because it was really, really good.
Well, thank you.
So in this podcast, a big part of what we're doing here is trying to build bridges between other religions, whether it be the Mormon Church or Catholicism. We're exploring other religions and we're trying to build bridges. So what would you say in your personal life? How have you learned from other religious perspectives, and has that wisdom changed the way that you approach your faith and your work?
Yeah, so this concept of grace obviously is many times really a sticking point between the Latter-day Saint experience and maybe the evangelical experience. They're all in for grace, right? And they'll often approach Latter-day Saints and be like, "You do not understand this. You don't understand grace. You don't believe in grace." And we're like, "What do you mean we don't believe in grace? Of course we do." But yeah, but you got all these like expectations and all these commandments and all these things. You got to get baptized. You got to do all these ordinances. And so we can really miss each other or talk past each other that way. And really, as I have, I love the experience of a good evangelical sermon. And in fact, there's a few pastors that I follow on YouTube where every week I will listen to their sermon. And that's what I love in this. I think COVID definitely ramped it up, but it seems like any church, no matter how small, they record and broadcast their sermons every week. And so if people don't have the ability or time or, to visit other faith experiences, a lot of them are on YouTube and jump in. I encourage you. One of my favorite, if you need a good starting point, one of my favorite is Andy Stanley, who's in Georgia. His presentation style, his message is just so grace-filled and encouraging. And it's really helped me, especially articulate the concepts in this book, to hear how they articulate the gospel. As humans, we get stuck in these rote practices, whether we mean to or not, right? Like for a Latter-day Saint, you go to church and you could probably close your eyes and walk through any building, right? Even if you've never been to that building, because they're sort of cookie cutter. They're, the
so
gym's
true.
in the middle and the chapel's near the front in the middle, and there's a hallway that goes around, right? And you could walk in, never really, how that's laid out. Even sometimes to the phrases that a member of a bishopric is going to use as they start a meeting, the hymns that'll be sung, right? And we sometimes, as Latter-day Saints, we sometimes pride ourselves on this of like, you can go to, Belgium on a Sunday and you'll hear the same message, the same thing. And I'm like, I think sometimes this may be too rigid, right? I often joke that, and maybe this is inappropriate, but forgive me. I often joke that we're the Walmart of churches, right? Like I've been to Walmart I've been to Walmart in Mexico City, and I walk in there and I'm like, am I in West Jordan, Utah? Like this feels the exact same thing,
That's so true.
And so what's helped me is I visited other churches. Actually, I have a pastor friend named Pastor Jeff McCullough who does Hello Saints, and he kidnapped me one Sunday, and I agreed to it. But he took me to 3 different church experiences on one Sunday. Now 3 hours of church, I used to be used to that, but this was a new experience for sure, and it was a long day. But it was so interesting to see the more liturgical practices, maybe in a Lutheran faith. We went to a mega church where the pastor's up there, he's got his tattoos, his jeans, and he's rocking it. He's preaching the word, and it was like a concert, right? It was really cool to experience that.
That's on our list.
Yeah, and I've got a few you should check out, but just like stepping out of my typical experience and going to church and worshiping with people, it is remarkable. You begin to understand concepts differently because, they say it differently here. It's the same gospel. At least it sounds like the same principle, but now I'm better prepared to fit that piece into my own faith, right? Or if it doesn't fit in your tradition or faith, you can just observe it with the holy envy that it is and appreciate it, right? And oftentimes, people, especially Latter-day Saints, they'll get frustrated sometimes with our very rigid service experience or the way things are and the traditions, right? And they think, I wish we could why can't we go to church in Levi's and have a rock concert, right? And I think they're just supposed to be different because you appreciate them differently, and it gives us reason to worship with our neighbors at different times. On Easter Sunday, we had an hour of church that Sunday, and since with more time, I took my entire family back to the church. It's called The Well. It's a mega church in Sandy, Utah. And because I wanted my kids to experience how this is differently. And so then they'll be able to pick up on what is unique about our faith. And so anyways, I've probably droned on, but there's such a benefit of experiencing different faiths and appreciating them for what they are.
Yes.
Talk all day. We're here.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
That's church.
Yeah, really. That makes me so happy that you took your kids there, because that's exactly what I have been trying to do. It started with just a passion for wanting to learn about other religions. And then Emmy had the idea for this podcast, and it just all felt so right. And one of the best things I've experienced through all of this is taking my kids. And they've only come to a few of them with us. They haven't gone to all of them. But it has sparked that in me, that interest of they need to see different things, because we come from a family that loves to travel. And so it's a similar feeling, when you travel to a new place where you're look how they do things differently. And I think there's so much wisdom to be gained there, just from different, whether it be a different religion or different place or lifestyle, there's just so much to be gained.
We, and our listeners have heard me say this a few times, but this was kind of an experiment. We went into it saying, don't be afraid. It's a good thing to explore different churches, but we weren't totally sure what it would do to our testimonies because we hadn't done it, and we had a little bit, I'm very open to different churches, and I've always wanted to, my whole life, just visit different churches, and I have here and there, but we're really focused on that right now, and taking our kids and things like that. And so, and interviewing all of these leaders of different churches has been just mind-blowing and such an amazing experience. But we didn't really know what that would do to our own spirituality and our own testimonies within our own church. We hoped that it would be okay, but we weren't totally sure, and so, but it really has strengthened my testimony of my own church so much, and my spirit and my connection to God so much, in a way that I can't even explain. And I think, and it's not because they're wrong and we're right. It's because I have taken good things from their churches and added them to my own, to my own information, my own light, my own spirit. And I feel so much more well-rounded. I feel like a better person. I feel like I have more grace, and I am more understanding of different people. I just think it's so important for people to kind of open their minds to different possibilities, and not just because we want them to get what we have, but also because they can give so much to us. And so I love that you're doing that, and that you're open to it, and that you're, open to letting people know that you're open to that too. I think that's important, that others can see that it's okay and it's not scary, Yeah.
And that's the thing. A big thing I learned is that, sometimes you kind of feel nervous, going to this church, and that's why I'm glad I had somebody there to go with. But it's helped me gain some empathy of like when people, we put visitors welcome outside of all of our churches, and it's like, why don't you people walk in here? What's the problem? It's like, it's so unfamiliar. It's out of people's comfort zones. And so it made me think, what more could I do to make our church that when someone walks in the door, right there, they have somebody, hey, are you new here? Do you know where to go? How can I help you? And a lot of these churches I visited, they really nailed that down. There was signage. There was like individuals welcoming people and taking them, at the right place and asking questions and making sure they had answers for my questions. And so, yeah, it's just so helpful to get to step out of our experience that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Completely agree.
I like that you said what you said about grace as well, because I've heard Pastor Jeff actually say before that we do too much. Which I just thought that was interesting. I think he was talking to you on a podcast or something, and he said we do too much. It's just about grace. So anyway, it's interesting to hear from other people. I love it. I love it. I love to hear people's perspective on us as well. We just went on a cruise to Mexico, and during the cruise, I met a girl, and she was from a different Christian church. And she pulled me aside and started talking to me, and she's asked where I was from. I told her, and she said, "Oh, are you Mormon?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are you all Mormon?" And some of my family's not. And so I said, "Well, some of us." And she goes, "But are you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I can tell." She's like, "You have a very specific spirit." And I was like, "Oh, I'm glad it's not like the way I dress and my hair and my fit. It was like my spirit." Like, I thought that was so cool.
That's cool.
And then we sat down and we chatted. And then eventually I was like, "Can I record you for our podcast?" And she said yes, which it's going to be an awesome episode. But
nice. Great, with all the pool noise in the background.
I know.
I've done a few of those.
Bonus,
so.
Yeah. But she was so intrigued by our church, and so interested. But she was also not afraid to tell me what she thought was weird and just kind of give me her perspective. Like, we were just friends, and I wasn't trying to convert her, and she wasn't trying to convert me. And we were truly, genuinely just interested in each other and what each other believed in. And because of that, she was able to be as open as possible, and really just tell me exactly what she thought. And some of it, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And she also had some things to say about her church that she didn't love. Like, she was just very open and raw and real. And I love that. That's what I love so much about this podcast is getting to know people in a really genuine way. So
that's awesome.
Ashley, what were you going to say?
Tell if you're not being genuine. And I do think that we're always prompted to be missionaries and invite people and talk about our faith. But I do think that we need to realize that we need to talk about other people's faiths as well. And they'll feel that mutual respect when we do so. We interviewed a Muslim woman named Mesa, and she said, "Ask me about my hijab. Like, none of this will offend me." And we love to get the questions. And so it does make you realize, I think fear holds us back a lot from whether it's going to church or asking someone about their faith. Fear is definitely a big one that stands in the way. And I would just recommend that people go with a friend, like you went with Pastor Jeff, and it really is, it makes it way less scary to have someone with you. If I didn't have Emily walking through these churches with me, I might not be able to. So it makes a big difference.
Plus, I'm very bold, and I don't get nervous.
Get it done. I'll just follow behind.
I will ask whatever needs to be asked.
It's very true. We're good balanced that way.
Yeah.
So for this last question, this one is just a bit of fun. You can either share an embarrassing moment with us and our listeners, or you can answer this question. If you could meet any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Oh, man, that's a good one. So an embarrassing moment. I'm sure there's something. Okay, I got an embarrassing moment, and it's related to church. So
nice.
So I served as a bishop, right? This is typically a 5-year experience in our lay ministry, and you wear a suit as a bishop. That's sort of tradition. Maybe a tradition we should get rid of, but so I wore a suit every week. And this one Sunday, I was going, through the different meetings, and suddenly one of my friends came up really close behind me and like whispering into my ear, and he said, "Bishop Francom, there is a tear in your pants all the way down."
Oh no!
So I must have I must have like leaned up against something or sat on a chair with like a sharp thing, and it just cut my pants right down to that. I was just walking around like, hey, how's everybody
nice and breezy.
doing? And so I said, I will go home and I will be back. Thank you. But I mean,
excuse yourself.
Talk about a charitable offering there. If someone, they didn't all pretend that the bishop, the emperor with no clothes, it wasn't the bishop with a tear in his pants or perfect pants. But
I always love when people will tell me, and then I'm so embarrassed that someone didn't tell me earlier.
I know, right?
Like, why?
But
You're
walking
like,
around with
rude.
broccoli in my teeth all day,
Yes.
That is awesome.
Oh, I'm so
That's
glad you
so
shared
funny.
that. That is the best. This is what people relate to,
That's
it helps
right.
us all feel a little more
Human.
human. That's too good.
Oh, that's
Well,
funny.
thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful, and I'm so sorry I was late.
It's all right.
But
Worked
we
out.
really enjoyed
Yeah,
our time
we
with
really
you, and I feel like
appreciate you.
we have gained so much wisdom and knowledge from you. So thank you.
What a great conversation with Kurt Francom. We loved hearing his insights on grace, disappointment, and how understanding God's love can transform the way we see ourselves. If you want to dive deeper into those topics, be sure to check out his book, Is God Disappointed in Me? Removing Shame from a Gospel of Grace. You can find it on Amazon in both paperback and audio. And don't forget to follow Kurt on Instagram at Leading Saints to stay connected and hear more of his wisdom. You can also find the Leading Saints podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to follow our Instagram as well at That's Church Podcast for updates and insights. Thanks again for joining us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with a friend. We'll see you next time on That's Church.